You don't need to understand anything you hear tonight. There is nothing here to solve, nothing to memorize, and nothing you're expected to carry with you when this ends. You can simply listen, the way you might listen to rain moving across a distant roof, or to the quiet hum of a room settling into night. If your thoughts feel scattered, that's okay. If your mind keeps drifting away and coming back again, that's okay too. This isn't a test of focus. It isn't a lesson you need to follow from beginning to end. It's just a gentle stream of ideas, moving slowly enough that you can rest beside them or let them pass without noticing at all. Quantum physics can sound intimidating. The words themselves often feel sharp or technical, as though they demand effort. But beneath those words is something surprisingly soft, a description of reality that doesn't insist on certainty, a way of looking at the universe that quietly admits it doesn't have all the answers. And that can be comforting. You may have spent the day surrounded by things that needed decisions, explanations, or outcomes, conversations that required attention, thoughts that kept looping back on themselves, questions that felt heavy simply because they were unanswered. None of that needs to come with you here. Tonight, you're allowed to listen without responsibility. You're allowed to hear unfamiliar ideas without trying to hold on to them. You're allowed to let sentences fade before they fully land, the way dreams do when sleep begins to take over. There's no correct way to experience this. Some moments you may be aware of every word. Other moments, the sound may blur into something softer, something almost wordless. Both are exactly as they should be. Quantum physics, at its heart, begins with a simple realization that the world we move through each day isn't as solid or as definite as it appears. Not in a frightening way, not in a way that suggests instability or danger, but in a way that suggests flexibility, openness, and possibility. For centuries, people believed reality worked like a collection of tiny, solid pieces, like stones stacked together to form everything you see. But as scientists looked closer, those stones began to soften. Edges blurred. Certainty loosened. And instead of breaking reality, this discovery seemed to reveal something gentler underneath. At the smallest scales, things don't rush. They don't announce themselves. They don't demand to be fully understood. They exist in quiet relationships, subtle movements and patterns that don't always resolve into clean answers. It's okay if that feels confusing. Confusion here isn't a problem. It's a sign that the mind is stepping outside its usual habits, even if only slightly. You don't need to picture particles or equations. You don't need to imagine diagrams or experiments. If images come naturally, you can let them appear. If they don't, that's just as fine. Sometimes it's enough to think of reality as something more like a slow breath than a machine, something that expands and relaxes, something that doesn't hurry, even when we do. As you listen, you might notice your body beginning to settle. The way shoulders soften when they're no longer holding themselves up, the way breathing becomes less deliberate, less managed. This is a natural response, not something you have to encourage. You're not trying to fall asleep. Sleep often comes more easily when it isn't being chased. Quantum physics doesn't tell us what must be happening. It describes what seems to happen when we look closely enough, carefully enough, and patiently enough. And even then, it often speaks in probabilities rather than certainties. That's important. Probability means allowance. It means space. It means that things can exist without being pinned down immediately. There is something deeply calming about a world that doesn't insist on exactness at every moment. In everyday life, it's easy to feel as though you're expected to be precise, to know what you want, to know where you're going, to know who you are at all times. But at the smallest levels of reality, that pressure disappears. Things don't define themselves rigidly. They remain open, flexible, quietly unresolved. And maybe that's a reminder you can borrow tonight. You don't need to define this moment. You don't need to decide how you feel about it. You can let it exist as it is, unexamined and unjudged. Quantum physics emerged not because scientists were looking for comfort, but because reality refused to behave as expected. Experiments produced results that didn't fit into neat categories. And instead of forcing those results into old frameworks, Some people chose to listen. They allowed the strangeness to remain. That willingness to allow uncertainty is one of the gentlest qualities in science, even if it doesn't always seem that way from the outside. Tonight, uncertainty isn't something to fix. It's something to rest inside. If your thoughts wander, you don't need to bring them back. If you miss a sentence or forget what was just said, nothing is lost. The words are not building toward a conclusion you need to reach. They're simply unfolding. Sometimes the most calming realization is that nothing is required of you right now. No insight, no understanding, it's no reaction, just listening or not listening as your body prefers. At very small scales, quantum physics suggests that things don't always have a single definite state. They exist as possibilities, not as chaos, but as openness. You might imagine this like a gentle fog rather than a sharp outline, something present without being rigid, something there without insisting on attention. Possibility doesn't mean instability. It doesn't mean danger. It simply means that reality isn't always finished in the way we expect it to be. And neither are you. There's no need to resolve anything tonight. No need to arrive anywhere. You can stay exactly where you are, suspended comfortably between wakefulness and rest. The universe at its deepest levels seems comfortable with this in-between state. It doesn't rush to finalize itself. It doesn't panic about ambiguity. It just continues, quietly. You may notice that as ideas soften, your breathing becomes more even, not because you're controlling it, but because the body recognizes when effort is no longer necessary. That recognition can feel subtle, almost like sinking into warm water without realizing how cold you were before. Quantum physics doesn't demand belief. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to trust it. You can simply let it exist as a story about how reality behaves when no one is watching too closely. Stories don't need to be proven to be soothing. They only need to be gentle. As the words continue, they may begin to feel less like information and more like texture, sound without weight, meaning without pressure. This is where rest often begins. There is no finish line here, no final thought you need to stay awake for. The ideas will continue whether you're aware of them or not, and that's a relief. At the smallest scales, nothing seems to demand urgency. Particles don't rush. Particles don't argue with each other. They simply coexist, quietly, until something invites one of them to step forward. You can allow yourself that same patience. You don't need to decide how this night will unfold. You don't need to predict when sleep will arrive. You can let it approach in its own time, the way evening slowly gives way to night without announcing the exact moment it happens. If you're still awake, that's fine. If you drift in and out, that's fine too. There is no wrong way to be here. Quantum physics reminds us that observation itself is a kind of interaction. But tonight, you don't need to observe carefully. You don't need to pay close attention. You can let the words pass through you the way air passes through an open room. Nothing is being asked of you. Nothing is expected. The strangeness of reality. There is a quiet comfort in realizing that reality has never been as simple as it looks. Not because complexity is exciting, but because it means that uncertainty isn't a failure of understanding. It's a natural part of how the universe has always been. Long before anyone used the word quantum, people sensed that something about existence didn't fully align with common sense. The sky moved in ways that felt distant and unreachable. Time seemed to stretch or shrink depending on how it was experienced. Even silence never felt completely empty. What quantum physics eventually revealed was not chaos, but familiarity. A recognition that the world beneath appearances behaves differently than intuition expects, and that this difference is not new. It's not recent. It's not the result of modern confusion or technological overload. It has always been this way. Everyday experience gives the impression of solid ground, clear edges, and predictable motion. Objects appear to sit still until they move. Events seem to follow one another in tidy sequences. Causes come before effects, and outcomes appear definite. But when attention softens and observation becomes quieter, those tidy boundaries begin to relax. At very small scales, the universe does not insist on behaving like a collection of solid things. Instead, it moves more like a set of tendencies, patterns that are likely, but not fixed, behaviors that repeat often enough to feel stable, without ever becoming absolute. This isn't a flaw in reality, it's simply how reality works. The human mind evolved to navigate a world of large objects and slow changes. It learned to expect consistency because consistency is useful for survival. But usefulness is not the same as truth. Quantum physics gently suggests that what feels intuitive is not always what is fundamental. That realization doesn't remove meaning from the world. If anything, it adds a quiet layer of depth beneath the surface. Like realizing that a calm lake has currents far below, moving slowly and steadily, regardless of what the surface shows. Strangeness in this sense is not disruption. It's continuity. The universe didn't suddenly become strange when people started measuring it more closely. It revealed a strangeness that had been there all along, unnoticed, because it didn't need to announce itself. And there is something reassuring about that. It means the unfamiliar ideas you hear are not warnings. They are descriptions. They don't suggest instability or danger. They suggest a deeper kind of normal. At the smallest levels, reality does not hurry to explain itself. It does not resolve every question immediately. It allows ambiguity to remain, not as a problem, but as a feature. You might notice how different this feels from the expectations placed on daily life. So much pressure to decide, to define, to resolve. Quantum physics offers a quieter model, one where not everything needs to be settled at once. Experiments designed to observe the tiniest components of matter often produced results that seemed contradictory. Things behaved like particles in one moment and like waves in another. They appeared localized, then spread out, predictable, then uncertain. Instead of forcing these observations into familiar categories, scientists slowly accepted that the categories themselves might be incomplete. This acceptance didn't weaken understanding. It expanded it. Reality was not wrong for behaving strangely. Human expectations were simply too narrow. That distinction matters. It means that when something feels confusing, it isn't necessarily because something has gone wrong. It may simply be because the framework being used isn't wide enough yet. And frameworks can expand. You don't need to expand yours tonight. You can let the ideas exist without adjusting to them. They don't need to fit neatly into your understanding to be present. Quantum physics does not replace everyday reality. Chairs still support weight. Floors remain solid. Time still passes in familiar ways. The deepest strangeness operates quietly beneath all of this, without interfering. Like a slow current beneath a calm surface. There is no demand to reconcile these layers. They coexist without conflict. In the same way, you don't need to reconcile every thought you have. You don't need to make sense of every feeling before resting. The universe itself seems comfortable holding multiple descriptions at once. One for daily life, another for deeper inquiry. Neither invalidates the other. This layered nature of reality can feel unsettling at first, but over time, it often becomes soothing. It suggests that there is more room than we usually allow for, more room for uncertainty, more room for rest. Strangeness, when it is familiar, loses its sharpness. It becomes background texture rather than foreground concern. Quantum physics does not shout its discoveries. It whispers them quietly through careful observation and patience. The more closely reality is examined, the more it resists being pinned down, not because it is evasive, but because it is fluid. Fluidity does not mean instability. Water flows without collapsing. Air moves without falling apart. The universe appears to do something similar at its smallest scales. Movement without urgency, change without threat. This kind of strangeness doesn't demand attention. It doesn't require belief. It simply exists. You can allow it to exist without engaging. If your mind drifts, that's fine. If these ideas feel distant or abstract, that's also fine. They are meant to soften, not sharpen. Quantum physics does not insist that you abandon intuition. It only suggests that intuition is one layer among many, and layers can rest upon each other peacefully. You may notice that as the ideas unfold, there is less desire to grasp them tightly. They don't feel like puzzles anymore. They feel more like scenery passing slowly by. This is where the mind often begins to loosen its grip. Strangeness becomes familiar when it is no longer treated as a problem to be solved. The universe does not apologize for behaving the way it does. It does not attempt to make itself easier to understand, it simply continues. And somehow, that steadiness can be comforting. Reality does not panic about its own complexity. It does not rush to clarify every ambiguity. It allows uncertainty to remain without tension. You can borrow that attitude for the rest of the night. You don't need to clarify your thoughts before sleeping. You don't need to resolve the day. Quantum physics quietly reminds us that clarity is not always necessary for stability. Things can function perfectly well without being fully defined. As the night continues, the strangeness of reality may begin to feel less like an idea and more like a gentle backdrop. Something present, but not demanding. The words may begin to blur slightly. Sentences may feel longer, softer, less distinct. This is not something to correct. It is simply the mind adjusting its focus, the way eyes soften when looking into the distance. The universe does not require sharp focus at all times. Neither do you. Reality has always been layered, subtle, and quietly strange. And it has always carried on without difficulty. You can allow that same ease to settle in. There is no rush to understand what comes next. No need to prepare. Particles as possibilities. At very small scales, the idea of a particle begins to soften. Not disappear, but loosen its edges. What once seemed like a tiny, solid point becomes something quieter, something less fixed. In everyday life, a particle sounds definite, a thing that is somewhere, doing something at a specific moment. But when reality is observed closely enough, that certainty gently fades. Instead of behaving like a small object with a single location, particles often behave more like possibilities. Not possibilities in the sense of confusion or randomness, but in the sense of openness. They do not rush to decide where they are. They do not insist on occupying one precise spot until they are invited to do so. They exist as tendencies, as likelihoods, as soft suggestions of presence. This can feel strange at first, but strangeness does not imply disorder. A possibility is not chaos. It is simply a state that allows more than one outcome to coexist peacefully. You might imagine this like a quiet room before anyone enters it. Nothing is happening, yet everything is possible. There is no urgency for the room to choose what it will become. Particles behave in a similarly unhurried way. Until they interact, until they are noticed or influenced, they do not fully settle into a single description. They remain spread out, not physically scattered, but conceptually open. This openness is not instability. It is patience. Quantum physics does not suggest that reality is undecided because it is confused. It suggests that reality is undecided because it does not need to hurry. There is something deeply calming in that idea. The universe, at its most fundamental levels, does not rush toward final answers. It allows things to remain unresolved for as long as they naturally do. In daily life, unresolved things can feel uncomfortable. Unfinished tasks, unanswered messages, lingering questions. But unresolved does not always mean incomplete. Sometimes it simply means unforced. Particles do not experience anxiety about their state. They do not worry about choosing correctly. They do not feel pressure to become definite too soon. They remain open because openness is allowed. You can let that be a quiet metaphor tonight. You do not need to define every thought that passes through your mind. You do not need to decide what it means or where it leads. Thoughts, like particles, can exist as gentle possibilities. They can drift without settling. Quantum physics often describes particles using probability rather than certainty, not because scientists lack precision, but because probability is the most honest description available. A probability is a soft statement. It says, "This is likely," without demanding, "This must be." There is relief in that kind of language. Imagine how different life might feel if everything were allowed to be likely rather than required to be certain. if outcomes could be approached gently rather than forced into place. At the smallest scales, the universe already operates this way. Particles do not need to be pushed into existence. They appear naturally within patterns of possibility. You might think of this like waves forming on the surface of water. The water does not plan the waves. They emerge. Similarly, particles are not rigid objects moving through space like tiny stones. They are expressions of deeper patterns, momentarily taking shape before relaxing again. This does not make them less real. It makes them more subtle. Subtlety does not weaken reality. It enriches it. The idea that something can exist without being fully defined can feel unsettling when the mind is alert and active. But when the mind begins to rest, that same idea often feels comforting. You don't need to be fully defined to exist. You don't need to have everything sorted out to be real. Quantum physics reflects this quietly, without commentary. Particles can exist in more than one potential state at once, not as a trick, not as a paradox meant to confuse, but as a natural expression of openness. This coexistence of possibilities does not create conflict. There is no argument happening at the smallest scales, no struggle for dominance. Everything simply waits. Waiting, here, is not passive. It is balanced. The universe seems comfortable allowing things to remain in this gentle suspension. As you listen, you may notice your own thoughts behaving similarly. Ideas may arise without fully forming. Images may appear and fade before becoming clear. This is not distraction. It is the mind loosening its grip. You don't need to pull those thoughts into focus. You can let them remain as they are, partially formed, drifting. Particles do not resist this state. They do not try to collapse themselves into certainty prematurely. They wait until interaction invites definition. In the same way, you do not need to define yourself tonight. You do not need to decide who you will be tomorrow or how everything will unfold. You can remain open. Possibility does not mean unpredictability in a frightening sense. It means flexibility. A flexible reality can adapt without breaking. Quantum physics suggests that at the deepest levels, reality is built not from rigid pieces, but from relationships. From patterns that allow variation. This is why particles behave less like isolated objects and more like expressions of connection. Connection does not demand precision. It allows movement. As these ideas continue to unfold, they may feel less like information and more like atmosphere. A soft background hum rather than a sequence of facts. That shift is natural. You are not meant to track each idea. They are meant to pass by gently one after another. Particles as gentle possibilities offer a quiet lesson that being undefined is not a flaw, that remaining open can be a form of stability. You may notice the body responding to this softness, muscles releasing, breathing becoming less deliberate. This is not something to control. It is something to allow. The universe does not rush particles into certainty. It gives them space. You can give yourself that same space. Nothing needs to be resolved right now. Nothing needs to be decided. The night is long, and there is plenty of room to rest within it. As the words continue, they may begin to lose their sharp edges. Sentences may blur slightly, meanings may soften. This is where rest often deepens. Particles do not announce when they settle. They simply do quietly when the conditions invite it. Sleep often arrives the same way, not suddenly, not forcefully, but gently, when everything else is softened enough. You don't need to wait for a specific moment. You don't need to watch for signs. You can let possibility remain open. Reality, at its smallest scales, seems content to exist this way, suspended, flexible, unforced, waves, motion, and uncertainty. When reality is observed quietly enough, motion begins to feel more natural than stillness. Not hurried motion, not forceful change, but a gentle, ongoing movement that never fully stops. At the smallest scales, nothing is truly frozen in place. Even what appears still is quietly shifting, softly unfolding, moving in ways too subtle to notice without careful attention. This movement is not chaotic. It follows patterns that repeat without becoming rigid. like waves rising and falling on a calm body of water, never identical, yet never random. Quantum physics often describes this behavior using the language of waves, not because reality is literally water, but because waves capture something essential about how things move. A wave does not rush toward a destination. It does not need to arrive anywhere. It simply oscillates, rising and falling, expanding and contracting without resistance. There is no urgency in a wave, no pressure to resolve itself. It moves because movement is its nature. When particles are described as waves, it doesn't mean they lose their identity. It means their identity is not confined to a single point. They extend, they spread, they exist across space in a gentle, distributed way. This idea can feel strange when the mind is alert and analytical, but when the mind begins to rest, it often feels intuitive. Thoughts behave this way too. A thought rarely exists as a single, sharp point. It drifts in, it expands, it blends with other thoughts. It fades. Trying to pin it down often makes it feel more restless. Allowing it to move naturally lets it settle on its own. Quantum physics does not suggest that reality is indecisive. It suggests that reality is dynamic. Movement is not a sign of instability. It is a sign of life. At the smallest scales, this movement takes the form of oscillation. A gentle back and forth, a rhythm that never quite stops, even in the quietest moments. This rhythm does not need to be monitored. It does not require intervention. It continues whether anyone is paying attention or not. There is comfort in that. It means the universe does not depend on constant supervision. It does not require control to function. Waves do not argue with themselves. They do not resist their own motion. They rise and fall, and in doing so, they maintain balance. Quantum waves behave similarly. They carry information about possibility, not certainty. They describe where something might be rather than where it must be. This description is softer than a fixed location. It leaves room for variation, room for change. Uncertainty in this context is not a flaw. It is a natural outcome of motion. When something is constantly moving, its exact position becomes less important than its overall pattern. Quantum physics embraces this idea quietly. It does not try to eliminate uncertainty. It incorporates it. Uncertainty becomes part of the rhythm. In everyday life, uncertainty is often treated as something to overcome, something to reduce or eliminate. But at the deepest levels of reality, uncertainty appears to be woven into existence itself. Not as a problem, as a feature. This kind of uncertainty is gentle. It does not threaten collapse. It simply acknowledges that motion cannot be perfectly pinned down. A wave cannot be frozen without changing its nature. The same may be true of many things in life. Trying to force stillness where motion belongs can create tension. Allowing motion to continue naturally often creates ease. As you listen, you may notice a similar rhythm in your own awareness. Attention rises and falls. Clarity sharpens, then softens. There is no need to hold on to one state or another. Quantum waves do not choose a single form until interaction invites it. Until then, they remain spread out, gentle, undefined. This does not mean nothing is happening. Quite the opposite. A great deal is happening, just not in a way that demands precise labels. You might imagine this like a piece of music played very softly. The melody is there, but it doesn't insist on being followed note by note. It fills the space without drawing attention to itself. The universe seems to move this way at its smallest scales, always active, always flowing, without insisting on clarity. Motion does not imply noise. Movement does not require disruption. Quantum physics reveals a world where motion and calm coexist. Particles, when described as waves, are not racing through space. They are oscillating quietly, spreading their influence gently, without urgency. This gentle spreading is sometimes misunderstood as instability, but instability implies collapse. Waves do not collapse simply because they move. They maintain their form through motion. Uncertainty here is not a lack of order. It is a different kind of order. an order that allows variation, an order that does not require rigidity. As these ideas settle, they may begin to feel less like explanations and more like reassurance. Reality does not demand precision at every moment. It allows things to remain slightly out of focus. This allowance can feel like permission to not know exactly where you stand in every thought, permission to not track every feeling to its source. You can let awareness move the way waves do, gently, naturally. Quantum physics does not describe a universe on the brink of unpredictability. It describes a universe comfortable with motion, comfortable with patterns that repeat without becoming fixed. This comfort is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply exists. You may notice that as the words continue, your breathing finds a similar rhythm, in and out, rising and falling. Breath itself is a wave. It does not need instruction. It moves on its own. The universe breathes too in its own way through oscillations and rhythms that continue regardless of attention. Nothing needs to be held still. Nothing needs to be forced into clarity. The more closely one looks, the more reality seems to prefer suggestion over declaration. Waves suggest presence without insisting on exactness. This suggestion is enough. At the smaller scales, motion is constant yet calm. Change happens without drama. The universe does not rush through its own processes. It allows them to unfold. You can allow the same unfolding now. There is no requirement to follow each idea as it passes. They can move past like gentle swells, rising briefly into awareness before settling back into quiet. This is not distraction, it is alignment. Alignment with a rhythm that does not require effort. Quantum physics does not eliminate mystery by explaining everything. It reveals a mystery that is stable, reliable, and unthreatening. Motion continues. Waves rise and fall. Uncertainty remains, and nothing breaks because of it. As the night deepens, the movement of ideas may feel slower. Words may stretch out, their edges softening. This is natural. The mind, like a wave, does not stop abruptly. It gradually eases into stillness. Stillness, when it arrives, is not the absence of motion. It is motion balanced so evenly that it feels calm. Quantum waves do not need to disappear for rest to exist. They simply continue in gentler patterns. Sleep often arrives the same way, not by stopping thought completely, but by letting thought lose its sharpness. As these ideas continue to flow, you may find it easier to stop tracking them, not because they become less meaningful, but because meaning becomes less necessary. The rhythm itself becomes enough. Reality, at its smallest scales, seems content to move without destination, to oscillate without needing to arrive. You can rest within that idea. You don't need to reach the end of this thought. You don't need to follow where it leads. Observation without pressure. There is a quiet misunderstanding that sometimes follows discussions of observation, the idea that noticing something changes it in a dramatic or disruptive way, that attention carries responsibility, that awareness interferes. But at the deepest levels of reality, observation is not an act of control. It is simply a form of interaction, one gentle presence meeting another. Quantum physics does not suggest that reality is fragile. It does not imply that the universe waits nervously to see what will happen when it is noticed. Instead, it describes a world that responds naturally to contact without judgment or tension. Observation, in this sense, is not pressure. It is participation. When something is observed, it is not being forced into existence. It is not being demanded to perform. It is simply being met. This is an important distinction. In daily life, attention often feels heavy. Watching closely can feel like evaluating. Noticing can feel like expecting. But observation does not have to carry weight. At the smallest scales, particles do not react to being observed with distress or resistance. They do not panic. They do not struggle. They simply respond. The universe does not treat observation as intrusion. It treats it as connection. This means that awareness itself is not harmful. It does not break things. It does not disrupt balance. It is simply part of how reality unfolds. Quantum physics often describes how systems behave differently when they interact with measuring devices. But this interaction is not punishment. It is not correction. It is relationship. Every interaction changes something, even at large scales. Touch leaves warmth. Sound leaves vibration. Presence leaves vibration. Presence leaves influence. At the smallest scales, this influence becomes visible, not alarming, just noticeable. There is something reassuring about a universe that is not disturbed by being noticed. A universe that does not need to hide. Observation does not demand effort from what is observed. It does not require performance. It simply invites response. This can be a gentle reminder for the mind. You do not need to perform for your own awareness. You do not need to justify your thoughts by noticing them. Thoughts can arise and respond to attention naturally, without pressure. Quantum physics does not describe a world where awareness is dangerous. It describes a world where awareness is woven into the fabric of interaction. Nothing needs to be protected from being seen. This can soften the relationship you have with your own mind. You can notice a thought without interrogating it. You can observe a feeling without trying to change it. Observation does not require action. It can remain passive, gentle, and open. At the smallest scales, the act of observing does not collapse reality into something worse. It simply allows one possibility to express itself more clearly than others. This expression is not a loss. It is not the destruction of alternatives. Those alternatives existed as potential. They did not need to become real to be valid. In the same way, you do not lose anything by noticing one thought instead of another. You are not choosing wrongly by allowing one feeling to be present. Awareness does not close doors forever. It simply opens one moment at a time. Quantum physics reminds us that interaction is unavoidable. Everything touches everything else in some way. This does not create chaos. It creates continuity. Observation is part of that continuity. There is no need to monitor yourself closely tonight. No need to watch your breathing or track your thoughts. You can allow awareness to be soft. Soft awareness does not fixate. It does not cling. It simply notices and moves on. Particles respond to observation not because they are fragile, but because they are relational. They exist in connection, not isolation. This is a quiet truth that often goes unnoticed. Nothing exists completely alone, and connection does not require effort. The universe does not brace itself when it is observed. It does not resist contact. It responds smoothly, predictably, without strain. You can allow your own awareness to function the same way. You do not need to avoid noticing your thoughts, and you do not need to examine them closely. You can let them pass through awareness like reflections on water, visible for a moment then gone. Observation without pressure is simply presence without demand. Quantum physics does not frame the observer as a judge. It does not place responsibility on awareness. It simply acknowledges that when things meet, something happens. That happening does not need to be managed. As you listen, you may notice moments of clarity followed by moments of softness. This fluctuation is natural. You're not losing focus. You're allowing awareness to relax. Particles do not hold themselves rigid when observed. They respond, then continue. They do not remain tense afterward. They do not carry the memory of being observed. They simply move on. You can do the same. You do not need to remember every thought you have. You do not need to keep track of your awareness. It can come and go freely. Quantum physics quietly removes blame from observation. It does not accuse awareness of interference. It simply describes interaction. This is an important shift. It means that noticing something does not make it worse. It does not create problems that were not already there. It simply brings one aspect of reality into the foreground. And the foreground changes constantly. Nothing stays there for long. As the night deepens, you may notice that awareness itself begins to feel less focused, not dull, just diffuse. This is not something to resist. Diffuse awareness is restful. It allows the mind to stop gripping individual thoughts. Quantum physics does not privilege sharp observation over gentle presence. It recognizes both as natural states. You do not need to sharpen your attention to be aware. You can let it soften. Observation does not need to be intense to be real. A glance is still seeing. A quiet presence is still awareness. Particles do not require precise observation to exist. They exist regardless. The same is true for your thoughts and sensations. They do not depend on your attention to continue. You can allow awareness to fade in and out without concern. Nothing is lost when attention drifts. Nothing important disappears. The universe does not demand constant observation. It does not stop functioning when awareness relaxes. You can trust that things continue on their own. This trust can feel like relief. You are not responsible for keeping reality in place. You are not required to hold your mind together. Quantum physics does not place that burden on you. It describes a world that maintains itself through relationship and pattern, not through supervision. As these ideas continue to unfold, you may find yourself caring less about tracking them. They become background rather than content. This is a natural transition. The words may begin to feel like a steady presence rather than a message. Observation becomes softer. Awareness becomes wider. There is no need to correct this. This widening is part of rest. Particles do not cling to the moment they are observed. They do not stay fixed in response. They respond, then return to motion. You can allow your own awareness to behave this way. Notice, then release. Nothing needs to be held. Nothing needs to be maintained. As the words continue, they may begin to overlap slightly in your perception. Sentences blending. Ideas merging. This is not confusion. It is the mind stepping away from precision. Precision is not required here. Quantum physics does not demand that every interaction be perfectly measured. It accepts limits. It accepts softness. You can accept softness too. Observation without pressure allows rest to deepen naturally. There is no moment you need to watch for. Sleep does not require observation. It arrives when awareness becomes light enough to let go. You do not need to witness it happening. Time as an experience. Time often feels like something firm and unyielding. A steady line moving forward, moment by moment, never slowing, never waiting. In daily life, it can feel as though time presses constantly, urging everything along, but when reality is observed more quietly, time begins to soften. Quantum physics does not treat time as a rigid backdrop against which everything happens. At the smallest scales, time behaves less like a straight line and more like a flexible experience. Not broken, not unreliable, simply less fixed than intuition suggests. This flexibility does not disrupt reality. It supports it. At very small scales, events do not always arrange themselves neatly along a single timeline. Order becomes less absolute. Sequence becomes less rigid. This does not mean that time disappears. It means that time does not insist on being experienced the same way everywhere, all at once. There is a quiet relief in this idea. It suggests that urgency is not fundamental, that rushing is not built into the universe itself. The pressure to hurry is something added later, at larger scales, where schedules and expectations emerge. At the deepest levels, time appears more patient. Quantum physics hints that moments are not always sharply divided, that the boundary between before and after can blur slightly, not enough to cause confusion, just enough to allow softness. This blurring does not erase structure. It relaxes it. You might notice this flexibility in your own experience of time. Some moments feel long and spacious. Others pass without notice. The clock may measure them equally, but experience does not. Quantum physics quietly acknowledges this difference between measurement and experience. Time, when measured, appears uniform. Time, when lived, does not. At the smallest scales, this distinction becomes visible. Events can unfold without a strict sense of duration. Interactions occur without the need for a clearly defined timeline. This does not create chaos. It creates freedom. Freedom from the idea that everything must happen at a specific speed. You do not need to move at the same pace as the clock tonight. You do not need to match any external rhythm. your experience of time can slow naturally. As the night deepens, moments may begin to stretch, silence may feel longer, thoughts may take more time to form or not form at all. This is not something to resist. Quantum physics suggests that time itself is comfortable with this variation. There is no single, universal tempo that everything must follow. Different processes unfold at different rates. At the smaller scales, some changes happen extremely quickly. Others linger. Neither is more correct than the other. Time accommodates both. This flexibility means that nothing is late. Nothing is early. Everything happens when conditions allow it. Sleep is no exception. You do not need to reach a specific moment for rest to begin. There is no deadline. Sleep arrives when the mind no longer feels pressed by time. Quantum physics does not suggest that time controls reality. It suggests that time is part of reality's unfolding. This unfolding does not rush itself. Moments do not compete to arrive first. They simply occur. There is a subtle comfort in knowing that time is not something you need to manage right now. You do not need to watch it pass. You do not need to measure how long you've been awake. Time will continue without supervision. At very small scales, time can feel almost optional. Events relate to one another without always referencing duration. Sequence matters less than relationship. This can feel abstract, but it does not need to be understood. You can let the idea rest quietly in the background. If time is flexible, then there is room to slow down. There is room to pause without consequence. Quantum physics does not penalize stillness. It does not require constant progress. It allows moments to exist without direction. As you listen, the sense of time may begin to soften. Minutes may feel indistinct. The boundary between one moment and the next may blur. This is natural. The mind is no longer tracking time closely. It is allowing experience to flow without measurement. There is no need to correct this. Time does not need to be monitored for rest to occur. Quantum physics suggests that time is not always the same everywhere. Different perspectives experience it differently. This does not break reality. It enriches it. It means that your experience of time tonight is valid, whatever it becomes. You may feel as though time is slowing, or you may lose track of it entirely. Both are signs that effort is easing. There is no need to stay anchored to the present moment. You do not need to mark the passage of each second. You can allow moments to blend. Quantum physics does not insist that time be experienced consciously. It does not require awareness of duration. Events happen whether they are noticed or not. Sleep often arrives when awareness of time fades, not when the clock reaches a certain point, but when attention no longer measures. This is why watching the clock often makes sleep feel farther away. Measurement brings time back into focus. Letting measurement go allows time to soften again. You can allow that softening now. There is nowhere to be, nothing scheduled. Time is free to stretch and relax. At the smallest scales, time does not impose urgency. It allows processes to unfold in their own way. The universe is patient with itself. You can borrow that patience. You do not need to hurry toward rest. You do not need to wait for it either. You can remain where you are, allowing time to loosen around you. As the words continue, they may feel less connected to specific moments. They may seem to drift, unanchored to a timeline. This is not something to analyze. It is simply the experience of time becoming less prominent. Quantum physics quietly suggests that time is not a constant pressure. It is a context that can expand or contract. Tonight, it can expand. Moments can become spacious. Pauses can lengthen. There is no risk in letting this happen. Time does not collapse when it slows. Reality does not fall apart when moments stretch. Everything continues. The mind does not need to track duration to remain safe. You can allow awareness to float free of time. As this happens, the sense of before and after may begin to feel less important. Thoughts may arise without reference to when they began or where they lead. This is a restful state. Quantum physics does not frame time as a ruler measuring existence. It frames it as part of the experience of unfolding. Unfolding does not rush itself. You can let go of the idea that something should be happening by now. Nothing is late. Nothing is delayed. This moment is complete as it is. As the night continues, time may feel less like a line and more like a wide, open space. A space where moments rest beside one another without urgency. You can settle into that space. There is no need to move forward. No need to stay present. You can drift. Time does not need your attention right now. Quantum physics allows time to be flexible, and that flexibility allows rest, distance, connection, and quiet entanglement. Distance often feels like separation, a space that divides one thing from another, a gap that must be crossed to create connection. In everyday experience, closeness and distance seem opposite. Near feels connected, far feels apart, but at the smaller scales of reality, this distinction begins to soften. Quantum physics quietly suggests that distance does not always mean disconnection, that separation in space does not automatically imply separation in relationship. This idea does not arrive with drama. It does not overturn everyday experience. It simply adds a gentler layer beneath it. At very small scales, certain relationships appear to persist regardless of distance, not as signals traveling back and forth, not as messages being sent, but as shared states, as quiet correlations that do not weaken when space increases. This phenomenon is often described using the word entanglement, but the word itself can sound sharper than the experience it points to. Entanglement is not tension. It is not binding. It is simply connection that does not rely on closeness. Two things can share a relationship without needing to touch, without needing to communicate, without needing to move toward each other. They remain related because they emerge together, because they belong to the same pattern. This kind of connection is not emotional. It is not intentional. It is structural. Quantum physics does not suggest that everything is secretly influencing everything else in dramatic ways. It describes specific relationships that remain coordinated even when separated. There is no urgency in this coordination, no effort required to maintain it. It simply persists. This persistence is quiet. It does not announce itself. You would never notice it without looking very closely. There is something calming about a universe where connection does not require constant maintenance, where relationships can exist without effort. In daily life, connection often feels fragile, something that must be sustained, something that can't be lost. But at the smallest scales, some connections appear remarkably stable. They do not fade with distance. They do not weaken over time. They simply remain. This does not mean that everything is connected in a way that demands attention. It does not mean that distance is meaningless. It means that separation is not always absolute. There can be closeness without proximity. You might notice a similar experience in your own life. Moments when someone feels present even when they are far away. When a memory brings a sense of closeness without physical contact, these experiences do not violate everyday reality. They simply reflect the mind's ability to hold relationships beyond immediate space. Quantum physics suggests that reality itself may hold relationships in a similar way. This is not something to analyze. It does not need to be proven to feel comforting. It simply offers a quieter picture of distance. Distance, in this view, becomes less like a wall and more like an interval, a stretch of space that does not necessarily break connection. At the smaller scales, information about relationship is not carried through space like a message. It exists as part of the system itself. This means that nothing needs to travel. There is no rush. Everything that needs to be shared is already present. This idea can feel abstract, but its emotional tone is gentle. It suggests that not everything depends on effort or proximity. Some things simply remain related. You do not need to reach out constantly to maintain every connection. You do not need to close every gap. Some relationships exist quietly, without maintenance. Quantum physics does not suggest that distance is an illusion. Space is real. Separation exists. But separation does not erase relationship. This nuance matters. It allows both distance and connection to coexist without conflict. As you listen, you may notice your own sense of distance changing. Thoughts may feel farther away. Sensations may feel less immediate. This is not disconnection. It is relaxation. Awareness is widening, not withdrawing. Entanglement, when described carefully, does not involve signals moving faster than anything else. It does not imply communication. It simply describes correlation. When one aspect of a system is experienced, the other reflects that relationship. There is no message sent, no action required. This is why entanglement does not feel loud. It is quiet by nature. The universe does not dramatize its connections. It allows them to exist quietly in the background. You do not need to notice them for them to persist. This can feel reassuring. It suggests that not everything depends on vigilance. Not everything requires attention to stay intact. As the night continues, the idea of distance may soften further, not disappearing, but losing its sharpness. Space becomes something you rest within, rather than something you cross. Connection becomes something that exists, rather than something you pursue. Quantum physics does not frame connection as something fragile. It does not suggest that reality is constantly on the verge of falling apart. It describes patterns that hold, patterns that remain coherent, even when stretched across space. This coherence does not feel tense. It feels stable. Stability without rigidity. You may find that as these ideas settle, there is less urgency to track them. They become less like concepts and more like atmosphere. This is natural. The mind is no longer trying to assemble meaning. It is allowing tone to take over. Distance, in this state, feels less relevant. Thoughts do not need to be close to be present. Awareness does not need to be sharp to be aware. Quantum physics does not insist on closeness as a condition for relationship. It allows relationship to exist in quiet ways. This quietness is important. It means the connection does not demand energy. It does not drain. It simply is. You can allow yourself to rest within this idea. You do not need to close every distance tonight. You do not need to resolve every separation. Some things can remain as they are, connected in ways you do not need to manage. As awareness softens, you may feel less anchored to specific sensations. The body may feel lighter. Boundaries may blur slightly. This is not loss of self. It is loosening. Quantum physics does not erase individuality. It shows how individuality exists within relationship. Particles remain distinct, even when entangled. They do not merge. They simply share information about their state. You can remain yourself while allowing connection to exist quietly in the background. There is no need to define where you end and everything else begins. At rest, those boundaries naturally soften. The universe does not insist on sharp separations at all times. It allows overlap. Overlap does not mean confusion. It means continuity. As the words continue, they may feel less directional, less like they are going somewhere. This is intentional. Connection does not require movement. It exists without travel. You do not need to follow each sentence to remain connected to the experience. The presence is enough. Quantum physics offers a subtle reassurance. That distance does not automatically mean isolation. That separation does not eliminate relationship. This reassurance does not need to be held consciously. It can remain in the background like a quiet warmth. As rest deepens, the sense of being located in a specific place may soften, not disappear, but become less central. Awareness becomes more diffuse. This is not something to resist. It is a natural part of letting go. The universe does not require you to stay sharply defined to exist within it. It allows you to relax your edges. Connection does not disappear when edges soften. It becomes quieter, more ambient. As the night continues, you may find that the idea of distance feels less important, not because it is gone, but because it no longer needs attention. Connection, too, no longer needs to be noticed. It simply remains. Quantum physics does not ask you to believe in anything extraordinary. It does not demand that you imagine invisible threads or dramatic forces. It simply points to a reality where relationship can persist without effort. You can allow that idea to settle gently. There is nothing to do with it, nothing to apply. It does not require action. Order emerging from uncertainty. Uncertainty is often misunderstood as disorder, as though not knowing exactly what will happen means that nothing is stable. But when reality is observed quietly enough, a different picture begins to appear. At the smallest scales, uncertainty does not erase order. It allows a different kind of order to form. Quantum physics does not describe a universe held together by rigid predictability. It describes one that finds balance through patterns, even when individual outcomes remain open. This balance does not announce itself loudly. It does not require precision to be noticed. It simply emerges. When many possibilities exist, they do not clash. They arrange themselves into tendencies. Likely patterns appear, not because they are forced, but because they are natural. This is how order arises without control. You can imagine a large number of tiny movements happening at once, each one uncertain on its own. Yet together, they create something steady. Like countless small ripples forming a smooth surface, at the quantum level, individual events cannot always be predicted with certainty. But when viewed together, their behavior becomes reliable, not exact, reliable. This reliability is quiet. It does not depend on perfection. Quantum physics accepts uncertainty at the smallest scales and still describes a world that functions consistently. That consistency is not fragile. It does not require constant adjustment. It emerges on its own. There is something deeply reassuring about this idea. It suggests that order does not need to be imposed. It does not need to be enforced through strict control. It can arise naturally from openness. In daily life, uncertainty is often treated as something to avoid. Plans are made to reduce it. Decisions are pushed forward to eliminate it. But at the deepest levels of reality, uncertainty is not eliminated. It is incorporated. The universe does not wait for certainty before continuing. It moves forward with what is available. Patterns form without insisting on exactness. This means that not knowing everything does not prevent stability. It allows stability to take shape in a more flexible way. You do not need to have every detail resolved for things to settle. Order does not require complete information. At the smallest scales, outcomes vary, but averages hold. Details fluctuate, but structure remains. Quantum physics often works with probabilities rather than predictions. This does not weaken its descriptions, it strengthens them. Probability allows room for variation without losing coherence. You can let that idea rest quietly. You do not need to predict how the night will unfold. You do not need certainty to feel safe. The universe does not wait for certainty either. It continues, allowing patterns to emerge gently. As you listen, you may notice your own experience following a similar rhythm. Thoughts may come and go unpredictably. Sensations may shift without warning. And yet, there is a steady background of calm beginning to form. This calm does not come from controlling thoughts. It comes from allowing them. Order can emerge from letting go. Quantum physics does not describe a world constantly on the edge of chaos. It describes one where uncertainty and order coexist comfortably. Uncertainty provides flexibility. Order provides stability. Neither needs to eliminate the other. This coexistence is important. It means that things do not need to be tightly managed to remain coherent. You can allow your mind to wander without fear that it will fall apart. The mind, like the universe, tends toward balance when not interfered with. As awareness softens, you may notice fewer sharp distinctions, less effort to follow each idea. This is not disorder. It is reorganization. The mind is shifting into a state where patterns matter more than details. Quantum physics often reveals that when many small uncertainties combine, the overall result becomes smooth and predictable. This is not contradiction, it is emergence. Emergence does not require oversight. It happens quietly, naturally. You do not need to supervise your thoughts for rest to appear. Rest can emerge on its own. In the universe, countless quantum events happen every moment, each one uncertain in isolation. Yet together they produce a world that feels solid, continuous, and dependable. This dependability does not come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from integrating it. There is relief in knowing that stability does not require perfection. You do not need to think perfectly. You do not need to feel consistently calm. Calm can emerge even when thoughts fluctuate. Quantum physics does not demand stillness to create order. It allows movement. Movement does not disrupt balance when it is allowed to flow. As the words continue, they may begin to feel less like explanations and more like reassurance. You do not need to understand how order emerges from uncertainty. You can trust that it does. Reality demonstrates this continuously. The universe functions without requiring certainty at every level. You can allow that same principle to apply here. You do not need to resolve every thought before sleeping. You do not need to quiet the mind completely. Order can emerge while thoughts continue to drift. This drift is not a problem. It is part of the process. Quantum physics shows that randomness at one level can create predictability at another. You can let this idea soften your expectations. You do not need to control the details of your experience tonight. The larger pattern is already forming. As awareness widens, the sense of effort may lessen. There may be fewer attempts to guide the experience. This is a sign that order is settling in naturally. The mind is finding its own balance. You do not need to assist it. Uncertainty does not mean that anything can happen at any moment. It means that outcomes are flexible within limits. Those limits create structure. The universe is not unbounded. It is gently constrained. These gentle constraints allow coherence. You can feel this coherence even as thoughts come and go. It is the background sense of continuity that does not disappear. Quantum physics does not promise predictability in detail. It promises reliability in pattern. This reliability is enough. You do not need to know what the next sport will be. You do not need to know when sleep will arrive. You can trust the pattern. The night does not require planning. Order is not something you create consciously right now. It is something that emerges as effort fades. As the words slow, the spacing widening slightly, you may notice that thoughts feel less insistent, less demanding. This is the mind responding to reduced pressure. Quantum physics does not hurry order into existence. It allows it to appear. You can allow the same. There is no moment you need to watch for, no transition you need to witness. Order will continue to form quietly, whether you notice it or not. As the night deepens, uncertainty may feel less threatening, more like a gentle openness. This openness is not emptiness. It is potential, and within that potential, patterns continue to organize themselves. You can rest within that process. There is nothing you need to do to help it along. The universe does not struggle to remain stable. It simply is. As awareness continues to soften, the sense of needing to understand may fade further. Understanding is not required for order to exist. You can let ideas blur without losing coherence. The mind knows how to settle. Order does not announce when it arrives. It does not demand attention. It simply becomes noticeable through ease. You may feel this ease as a subtle release, a sense that nothing needs to be fixed. Quantum physics offers this reassurance quietly, that beneath uncertainty, there is reliability, that beneath openness, there is balance, the limits of human knowing. Knowing often feels like security. To understand something is to feel oriented within it, to feel less surprised by what may come next. But there is another kind of security that comes not from knowing more, but from accepting that not everything needs to be known. Quantum physics gently introduces this idea, not as a limitation to be overcome, but as a natural boundary that shapes understanding itself. At the smallest scales, certain properties cannot be known at the same time with complete precision. This is not due to imperfect tools or insufficient effort. It is woven into the structure of reality. This does not make knowledge weak, it makes it contextual. You can know something clearly, but knowing it clearly changes what can be known alongside it. This is not failure, it is balance. Reality does not offer itself all at once. It reveals aspects, not the whole. Quantum physics does not suggest that everything is hidden. It suggests that understanding arrives in perspectives. Each perspective is valid, but none is complete on its own. This can feel unsettling if knowledge is treated as something that must be total. But it can feel deeply calming if knowledge is allowed to be partial. You do not need the entire picture to stand comfortably within it. In daily life, there is often pressure to understand fully, to explain, to predict. But the universe itself does not operate under this pressure. It continues whether or not it is fully known. This means that not knowing is not an interruption to reality. It is part of it. Quantum physics invites a quieter relationship with understanding, one that does not insist on closure. There are questions that do not need answers to function. There are mysteries that do not prevent stability. You can rest within that idea. You do not need to resolve everything before letting go. At the smallest scales, measurement itself changes what is measured. Observation is not neutral. This does not mean observation is wrong. It means that participation is unavoidable. You are always part of what you observe. This does not create confusion. It creates relationship. Knowing is not standing outside of reality. It is being within it. This means that limits to knowing are not barriers. They are edges. Edges define shape. Without edges, nothing would have form. The limits of knowing give structure to understanding. Quantum physics does not promise complete certainty. It promises consistency within boundaries. Those boundaries are not meant to frustrate. They allow coherence. You can allow the idea of not knowing everything to settle softly. It does not take anything away. It removes a burden. The burden of needing to figure it all out. As the night continues, the desire to understand every thought may begin to fade. Questions may arise and pass without needing answers. This is not avoidance. It is rest. The mind does not need to solve itself to be at peace. Quantum physics respects this. It does not demand that reality be fully transparent to function. It allows mystery without instability. In this way, not knowing becomes a feature, not a flaw. You can notice how the body responds to this permission. There may be a subtle release, a softening of mental tension. Trying to know everything takes energy. Letting some things remain open allows that energy to rest. Quantum physics does not frame uncertainty as ignorance. It frames it as fundamental openness. Openness is not absence. It is space. Space for possibility. Space for change. You do not need to fill that space tonight. You can let it remain open. There is no test to pass. No understanding to complete. The universe does not require comprehension to continue. It simply unfolds. Human knowing operates within limits, but those limits are generous. They allow depth without requiring totality. You can know enough. Enough to feel grounded. Enough to feel safe. You do not need to know everything. As awareness softens, the distinction between knowing and not knowing may feel less important. Thoughts can drift without needing to be categorized. Understanding does not need to be sharp. Quantum physics suggests that clarity is contextual. What is clear in one frame may blur in another. This does not mean clarity is lost. It means it is flexible. Flexibility is restful. You do not need to hold one perspective tightly. You can allow perspectives to change or fade. The mind is not required to stay focused to remain present. Presence does not depend on knowing. It depends on allowing. As the words continue, they may feel less like information and more like reassurance. Reassurance that it is safe to not understand everything right now, that it is safe to let questions remain unanswered. The universe does this constantly. It functions without complete self-knowledge. You can do the same. There is a quiet humility in this idea, but also a quiet freedom. You are not responsible for knowing it all. You are allowed to rest at the edge of understanding. Quantum physics does not promise that mystery will disappear with time. It suggests that mystery is part of structure. Structure does not collapse because of mystery. It is supported by it. As the night deepens, you may notice that curiosity itself becomes gentler, less driven. Questions may feel less urgent. This is not loss of interest. It is easing of pressure. You can allow your mind to loosen its grip on explanation. Nothing essential is lost. What remains is a quiet sense of continuity. The universe continues to exist whether or not it is fully known. So do you. As awareness drifts, you may feel less inclined to follow each idea, less concerned with forming conclusions. This is not disengagement. It is settling. Quantum physics does not ask you to abandon understanding. It invites you to let understanding rest, to recognize that knowing has limits, and that those limits are not dangerous. They are part of how reality stays open. Reality is a process, not a problem. Reality is often approached as something to be solved, a collection of questions waiting for answers, a puzzle that must eventually come together. But when reality is observed quietly enough, it begins to feel less like a problem and more like a process. Quantum physics does not describe existence as a riddle with a final solution. It describes a continuous unfolding, a movement that does not aim for completion. This unfolding is not chaotic. It is not confused. It simply continues. At the smallest scales, reality is not fixed in place. It is always becoming. Events do not snap into existence fully formed. They emerge gradually, shaped by context and relationship. This means that nothing is required to be finished. There is no final state that everything is trying to reach. This can feel like relief. You do not need to arrive anywhere tonight. The universe is not waiting for resolution before it continues. It allows process to be enough. Quantum physics often focuses on interactions rather than objects, on what happens between things, not just what things are. This shift is subtle, but important. It suggests that reality is defined by movement, by exchange, by change, not by static answers. A process does not need to be justified. It does not need to reach a conclusion to be valid. It exists by continuing. You can allow yourself to exist in the same way right now. There is no need to solve the day before resting, no need to make sense of every thought. Rest can occur in the middle of things. Reality does not pause while problems are resolved. It moves gently onward. At the quantum level, outcomes arise from interactions. They are not predetermined in isolation. This does not make reality unstable. It makes it responsive without urgency. The universe does not rush to fix itself. It adjusts continuously. You do not need to fix yourself to rest. You do not need to reach clarity. You are already part of the process. Quantum physics does not frame uncertainty as something to eliminate. It treats it as part of how reality stays flexible. Flexibility allows adaptation. Adaptation allows continuity. Nothing needs to be perfect for things to continue. This idea can settle softly. You do not need to resolve the past. You do not need to prepare for the future. You can remain within the present process without defining it. As awareness softens, thoughts may appear unfinished. Ideas may not lead anywhere. This is not a failure of thinking. It is thinking becoming less necessary. A process does not demand conclusions. It simply unfolds. Quantum physics does not insist that reality be fully known at every moment. It allows partial states. Partial does not mean broken. It means open. Open to what comes next. You do not need to anticipate what comes next tonight. The process continues whether or not it is anticipated. This removes pressure. There is nothing you need to complete before resting. Reality does not require your supervision. It has been unfolding long before attention arrived. It will continue without effort. You can let go of the idea that something needs to be solved right now. Nothing is wrong. The universe does not frame itself as a problem. It exists. Quantum physics reinforces this perspective quietly. It shows that reality is made of interactions, not answers. Interactions do not require judgment. They occur naturally. As the night deepens, you may notice less desire to categorize experience, less interest in labeling sensations or thoughts. This is natural. The mind is shifting from analysis to presence. Presence does not need explanation. It does not require understanding. It simply is. Quantum physics does not present reality as something to be controlled. It describes how things influence one another without domination. This influence is mutual. Everything participates. You are participating simply by being here. There is no role you need to perform, no outcome you need to achieve. You are already within the flow. A process does not rush itself. It does not criticize itself for not being finished. It allows each moment to be enough. You can allow this same attitude toward your own experience. Nothing about this moment needs correction. You do not need to think differently. You do not need to feel differently. You can let the process continue on its own. Quantum physics does not ask you to believe that everything happens for a reason. It suggests that things happen through relationship. Relationship does not require justification. It exists. As awareness drifts, the sense of needing to understand may soften even further. Understanding is not required to be part of reality. You are already included. The universe does not wait for comprehension. It unfolds regardless. You can rest within that unfolding. There is no urgency to arrive at insight. Insight may come or not. The process continues either way. Quiet integration loop. At some point, understanding no longer needs to move forward. It can rest where it is. The ideas you have heard do not need to be held. They do not need to be remembered. They do not need to connect to one another. They can simply remain, lightly present, like distant echoes that no longer demand attention. Quantum physics does not require active thought to exist. Its patterns continue whether or not they are considered. You can allow the same ease within your own awareness. Nothing new needs to arrive now. What has already been said can settle quietly, not as information, but as atmosphere. There is no sequence to follow anymore, no direction to track. The mind does not need to move forward or backward. It can rest in place. At the deepest levels of reality, processes continue without narration. They do not explain themselves. They do not announce progress. They simply continue. This continuation does not feel busy. It feels steady. You can allow your attention to soften further, letting thoughts slow, letting space widen between them. If a thought appears, it does not need to finish. If a sensation shifts, it does not need to be named. Everything is allowed to pass gently through awareness. Quantum physics does not insist on constant observation. It allows things to exist unobserved. You can rest in that permission. There is nothing you need to monitor. Breath can happen without being followed. Sound can exist without being interpreted. Time can pass without being noticed. This is not disengagement. It is integration. What has been heard is already part of the background. There is no need to place it anywhere. It does not need to make sense. Meaning is not required for rest. At the smallest scales, reality integrates itself continuously. Interactions settle into patterns without effort. You do not need to guide this process. Your mind knows how to integrate experience when given space. You can let that happen now. There is no need to remember where you are in the story. There is no story to follow. Only a gentle continuity. If attention drifts, that is fine. If it fades, that is fine. Nothing is lost. Quantum physics does not collapse when attention wanders. Reality does not disappear when it is not observed. Everything continues quietly. You may notice that words begin to feel more distant, less distinct. This is natural. They no longer need to be processed. They can become texture rather than content. A soft rhythm without instruction. The mind does not need to decide whether it is awake or asleep. It does not need to choose. States can blend. This blending is gentle. There is no boundary that must be crossed. Rest does not arrive suddenly. It emerges gradually, just as order emerges from uncertainty. Rest emerges from uncertainty. Rest emerges from allowing. Quantum physics does not push systems into stability. It allows them to settle. You can allow yourself to settle. Nothing is expected. Nothing is missing. If the same ideas seem to repeat, they do not need to be recognized as repetition. Repetition is soothing when it carries no demand. Patterns looping quietly do not require attention. They create familiarity. Familiarity allows rest. At the smallest scales, cycles exist everywhere. Processes repeat without boredom. The universe is not concerned with novelty. It is comfortable with continuity. You can borrow that comfort. Let the experience loop gently, without beginning, without ending. If awareness returns briefly, it does not need to stay. If it fades, it does not need to be retrieved. Everything is allowed. There is no task to complete, no insight to reach. Quantum physics does not offer closure. It offers continuation. continuation without urgency. You can remain within that continuation. The night does not need direction. Breath continues. Time passes. Awareness softens. Nothing needs to be named. Nothing needs to be held. The mind can float without effort. Thoughts may thin out, or they may drift slowly, or they may pause entirely. All of this is fine. There is no preferred state. Reality does not insist on clarity. It allows quiet. As this quiet deepens, the sense of self may feel less defined, edges softening without disappearing. This is integration. Nothing is lost. Everything is resting where it belongs. The words can continue, or they can fade into background sound. Both are acceptable. Quantum physics does not require participation. It exists whether or not it is followed. You can let go of listening now. Or you can let listening continue without effort. There is no difference. Everything that needs to happen is already happening. Abstract drift and mental stillness. At a certain point, thoughts no longer arrive as complete ideas. They soften before forming. They lose their edges. This is not confusion. It is drift. Drift does not move toward anything. It moves away from effort. Quantum physics does not require concepts to remain sharp. At the smallest scales, definitions blur gently into probabilities. Precision fades into presence. You can allow the same softening now. Ideas do not need to complete themselves. Sentences do not need to resolve. Meaning can dissolve without loss. The mind does not need to hold shape to remain intact. As attention loosens, awareness becomes less centered, less focused on any one thing. This is not absence. It is spaciousness. Spaciousness does not demand orientation. There is no inside or outside that needs to be identified. No foreground or background that needs to be chosen. Everything can exist evenly. Quantum physics does not privilege one perspective at all times. It allows multiple possibilities to coexist without collapse. The mind can do the same. Thoughts may appear briefly, then soften, then fade. They do not need to be followed. If a word lingers, it can blur. If an image forms, it can dissolve. Nothing needs to stay. Mental stillness does not mean emptiness. It means reduced insistence. There is less pulling toward understanding, less grasping for coherence. Coherence is already present. At the deepest levels, reality does not think about itself. It simply continues. You can rest within that simplicity. Breath moves without commentary. Sound arrives without interpretation. Time passes without being tracked. This is not something you need to achieve. It is something that happens when effort fades. Quantum physics does not require observation to maintain existence. It allows unobserved continuity. The mind does not need to watch itself. It can release its grip. Awareness may feel wider now, or quieter. Both are signs of settling. There is no correct way for this to feel. Stillness is not a fixed state. It is a gentle absence of pressure. Pressure to think. Pressure to respond. You can let that pressure dissolve. If attention drifts completely, there is no need to return. If it floats briefly, there is no need to anchor it. Drift is allowed. Quantum physics does not demand resolution. It allows indefinite openness. The mind does not need closure. Questions can fade without answers. Thoughts can pause without direction. There is no danger in this. Nothing is being lost. As abstraction increases, language becomes less relevant. Words become sounds. Sounds become rhythm. Rhythm becomes silence. Silence does not need to be noticed to exist. Stillness does not need to be defined. The boundary between listening and not listening may soften. Between awareness and rest. This boundary does not need to be crossed deliberately. It dissolves on its own. Quantum physics suggests that at fundamental levels, distinction itself becomes less absolute. Categories loosen. This loosening is calm. There is no need to sort experience. Everything can remain as it is. If the mind becomes blank, that is fine. If faint impressions remain, that is fine. There is no expectation. Stillness does not arrive suddenly. It seeps in, like fog, like night. You do not need to notice when it happens. Awareness does not need to witness its own fading. As the drift continues, thoughts may no longer form words. They may become vague impressions, or nothing at all. This is not sleep yet, and it does not need to be named. Quantum physics does not insist on boundaries between states. It allows transitions. You are within one now. There is no requirement to stay aware. There is no requirement to let go. Both are happening naturally. The mind can become very quiet here. Not forced, not empty, just still. As abstraction deepens, experience becomes simpler, less defined, less distinct. This simplicity is restful. There is nothing to understand, nothing to follow, nothing to hold.